I never believed in the paranormal. Ghosts, spirits, all that stuff seemed like tall tales meant to scare kids around campfires. That changed a few years ago when I moved into an old house on Willow Street. The house was cheap, too cheap for the size, in fact. I was fresh out of college, excited to be on my own, and the price was perfect for someone on a budget. The realtor had seemed eager to get it off her hands, but I figured it was just because of how long it had been on the market. The first few days went smoothly, and I began settling into my new life. It was an old Victorian-style home, creaky floors and all, but it had a charm I loved. I was proud of how it was coming together. But then strange things started happening. At first, they were small, easily dismissible. Items would be out of place, but I just figured I was forgetful, too many boxes still left unpacked. However, as the days passed, the occurrences became harder to explain. One night, while I was unpacking a box in my bedroom, I heard footsteps above me. I froze. The attic? I hadn't been up there yet, but the thought of someone being inside the house without me knowing sent chills down my spine. Trying to calm myself, I convinced myself that it was just an old house settling. Houses like these made noises, right? Still, I grabbed the broom, my only available weapon, and cautiously made my way up the stairs. The attic door creaked open when I pulled the string to release the ladder. A cold draft met me as I stepped inside. It was empty. The moonlight filtered in through a small window, barely illuminating the dusty boxes and forgotten furniture scattered across the room. I scanned the area but saw nothing unusual. Just as I was about to leave, a loud bang echoed from behind me. I whipped around, heart pounding, to find a box that had fallen from one of the shelves. That's when I saw it. A figure, shadow-like, standing in the far corner. It was still, almost like it was watching me. I blinked, trying to adjust my eyes to the dim light, and it was gone. My breath hitched in my throat, but I rushed down the ladder, nearly tripping in my haste to get back to the safety of my bedroom. I slammed the attic door shut and locked it, heart racing. It had to be my imagination, right? I couldn't have seen what I thought I did. The next few nights, I heard the footsteps again. Each time they seemed to get closer, like something was pacing above me. Sometimes, I'd hear faint whispering, too quiet to make out. Sleep became impossible. Then one night, I woke up to the sound of something scraping against my bedroom door. It wasn't loud, but it was persistent. I lay there, frozen, as the scratching continued. Slowly, I sat up in bed, eyes locked on the door. My heart felt like it would beat out of my chest. The door creaked open, ever so slightly. I didn't move. My breath felt stuck in my throat, and my body was paralyzed with fear. The door was now open just enough for a shadow to slip through, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the hallway. The house, once quiet and peaceful, now felt alive, buzzing with an invisible presence. After what felt like hours, the scratching stopped. I waited, listening, but the silence was deafening. I couldn't stay in that room any longer. Grabbing my phone and a flashlight, I slipped out of bed, careful not to make a sound, and tiptoed toward the door. The hallway was dark, eerily so, but I saw nothing out of the ordinary. I hurried downstairs and into the living room, turning on every light I passed along the way. My rational brain told me it had to be the wind, or an animal, or something explainable, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I spent the rest of the night on the couch, my back pressed against the cushions, flashlight clutched tightly in my hand. Sleep didn't come easily, but when it did, it was filled with nightmares of shadowy figures and whispering voices. The next morning, I called a friend of mine, Emily, to come over. I didn't tell her the full story, who would believe me, but I mentioned the strange noises and the unsettling feelings I had. She arrived with coffee and a sympathetic smile, ready to chalk it up to new house jitters. We spent the afternoon checking every room, including the attic. Nothing. No signs of intruders, no evidence of animals. Emily joked about the house being haunted, but when I didn't laugh, she raised an eyebrow. You don't actually think? I don't know what to think, I admitted. It just feels wrong here. Like I'm being watched. Emily gave me a concerned look but didn't push it. Instead, she suggested I take a break, maybe stay with her for a few days. It was a tempting offer, but I was determined to stick it out. After all, it was just an old house, right? That night, the footsteps started again. This time, they didn't stop at the attic. I heard them descend the stairs, slow and deliberate, one heavy step at a time. My heart raced as I realized they were coming toward my bedroom. I buried myself under the covers, gripping my phone with trembling hands, ready to call Emily or the police. Suddenly, the air in the room grew cold, unnaturally so, and the footsteps stopped right outside my door. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. Then came the whispering again, closer this time, as if someone were standing just on the other side of the door. I couldn't make out the words, but it felt like they were calling to me, beckoning me to open the door. I lay there, too terrified to move, until the sound faded and the room slowly warmed up again. The next morning, I made a decision. I needed to know what was going on. I headed to the local library, searching for any records about the house on Willow Street. I wasn't prepared for what I found. The house had a history, a dark one. Years ago, it had belonged to a family. They lived there for decades before the tragedy struck. One night, their youngest daughter, Lily, disappeared. No one ever found her, but locals whispered about strange occurrences in the house leading up to her disappearance. Footsteps, voices, doors opening on their own. And the attic? It was said that Lily had often spoken of a friend she played with in the attic, someone only she could see. After she vanished, the family moved away, and the house sat abandoned for years until it was put back on the market. No one ever stayed for long. I sat there, staring at the newspaper clippings in disbelief. Had I seen Lily? Or worse, had I encountered whatever had taken her? I decided to leave the house that same night. Whatever it was, I didn't want to stick around long enough to find out. But as I packed my things, something strange happened. The house, once so menacing, seemed to come alive with an overwhelming sadness. The air was heavy with sorrow, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was pleading with me not to leave. That night, for the first time in weeks, the house was quiet. The house had fallen into an eerie stillness. As I sat on the edge of my bed, suitcase half packed, I couldn't stop thinking about the history I had uncovered. The missing girl, Lily, haunted my thoughts. Was it her presence that lingered in this house? Or was it something darker, something that had taken her? Despite the unnerving calm, I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that I was being watched. My instinct told me to run, but another part of me felt drawn to stay. I knew that if I left, I might never know what really happened in this house, or why it seemed to want me here. That night, I made the reckless decision to stay just one more night. I wanted answers. I needed to confront whatever it was that had been tormenting me. So, instead of leaving, I made my way to the attic. I grabbed a flashlight and quietly ascended the creaky ladder, my heart pounding louder with each step. The attic was cold, the kind of cold that felt unnatural. The shadows stretched and curled, and as I panned my flashlight across the dusty space, I noticed something I hadn't seen before: an old, worn doll in the corner. It was small, almost hidden beneath some boxes, but its faded eyes seemed to be staring right at me. The air grew thick as I approached the doll, and a chill ran down my spine. I crouched down and gently picked it up, brushing off the layers of dust. It felt heavy, almost like it was weighted down with something more than just fabric and stuffing. That's when I saw it, a small, faded name embroidered on the doll's dress, Lily. A shiver ran through me. This had to have been hers. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the attic shifted. The air grew even colder, and the shadows seemed to press in around me. I could hear the faintest sound, like a child's giggle, echoing through the room. My pulse quickened, and I turned, scanning the room with my flashlight. The light caught something, a figure standing at the far end of the attic, near the window. It was a girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old, dressed in an old-fashioned white nightgown. Her hair was long and dark, covering her face, but I could tell she was watching me. My throat tightened, and I took a step back. "Lily," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The figure didn't move. She stood perfectly still, like a doll herself, as if she were waiting for something. My mind raced. Was this really her? Was I seeing the ghost of the missing girl? I swallowed hard, unsure of what to do. I wanted to run, to get as far away from the attic as possible, but my legs wouldn't move. Instead, I slowly reached out, holding the doll toward her. "I found your doll," I said softly, my voice trembling. "Is this what you're looking for?" The figure remained still for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, she lifted her head. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and empty. And yet, there was something deeply sad in her expression, as if she were trapped in some kind of endless sorrow. Just as I was about to take another step forward, the attic door slammed shut behind me. The sound was deafening in the quiet, and I spun around, dropping the doll in my panic. When I turned back to the figure, she was gone. The air in the attic grew suffocating, and a sense of dread filled the room. I had to get out. Without thinking, I ran to the door, pulling at it desperately, but it wouldn't budge. The shadows around me seemed to pulse and close in, and I could hear that faint whispering again. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I banged on the door, calling out for help, but my voice felt swallowed by the thick air. Then, the whispering grew louder, the words clearer. It wasn't just one voice now, it was many. They were overlapping, frantic, pleading. "Find her! Find her!" The voices were overwhelming, filling my head, and I felt like I might collapse under the weight of them. But just as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The air cleared, the whispers faded, and the attic door creaked open on its own. I stumbled down the ladder, my heart still racing, and collapsed on the floor below. What was happening? What did they want from me? I glanced back up at the attic, half expecting the door to slam shut again, but it remained open, the darkness inside still and quiet. And then it hit me. The voices, the frantic pleading, weren't calling for help. They weren't warning me to leave. They were asking me to find her. Lily hadn't just vanished. Something had taken her. Something was still there, waiting in the shadows. And now, it wanted me to finish what it had started. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The voices, the attic, the girl Lily were all swirling in my head. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see her standing there, eyes hollow, begging for something. It wasn't just about her disappearance anymore. Something deeper, darker, was buried in this house, and I knew that leaving wasn't an option. Not yet. The next morning, I made a plan. I needed to dig further into the house's history. The library had given me some information, but it wasn't enough. There had to be more, something hidden, something forgotten. I decided to visit the town's historical society. If anyone had records about this place, they would. The historical society was a small, unassuming building tucked away at the edge of town. The woman at the front desk, Mrs. Halloway, was in her late 60s, with silver hair pulled back into a tight bun. She gave me a polite smile as I explained what I was looking for. "You're interested in the old Willow Street house, huh?" she asked, her voice tinged with a hint of unease. I nodded. Yeah, I've been living there, and I've heard some things. Her expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something pity, maybe, crossed her face. Most folks don't stay there long, she said, almost under her breath. That house has a way of holding onto things. She led me to the back room, where old records and documents were stored. Together, we combed through years of property deeds, newspaper articles, and death certificates. It was painstaking work, but then we found it. An article from nearly 70 years ago. The headline sent a chill through me. Tragedy strikes Willow Street, family claims daughter taken by shadows. I skimmed through the article, my pulse quickening with every line. The family had indeed reported strange occurrences leading up to Lily's disappearance. According to the report, they'd heard footsteps, voices, and even claimed to have seen figures in the house. But it was the father's final statement that froze the blood in my veins. Asterisk, she was taken by something in the attic. We tried to stop it, but it wanted her, it had been waiting for her. Asterisk. Mrs. Halloway stood beside me, silent as I read. After a moment, she spoke quietly. There's more to the story than that article says. The family wasn't just dealing with grief. After Lily disappeared, the father lost his mind. He insisted the house was haunted, cursed, even. He spent years searching for his daughter, convinced she was still in the house, trapped. Eventually, he died in that very attic, alone. I stared at the words on the page, the weight of the revelation settling over me. The father believed something in the house had taken Lily. Something that was still there. Mrs. Halloway handed me another file, this one older and more worn. Inside were personal letters from the father. They were scattered, disjointed, filled with ramblings about shadows, voices, and the thing in the attic. But one line stood out. Asterisk, it takes what it wants, but it always leaves something behind. You must find her. She's still here, waiting. Asterisk. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Lily wasn't just missing, she was trapped, and whatever had taken her had left something behind. Something that I needed to find. I thanked Mrs. Halloway and left the Historical Society, my mind racing. I had to go back to the house. I had to search the attic again, more carefully this time. If Lily was still there, if she was waiting for me to find her, I couldn't leave her behind. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the house on Willow Street fell into shadow, I prepared myself. Armed with a flashlight, the doll I had found, and a newfound determination, I climbed the attic ladder once more. The air felt heavier this time, as if the house knew what I was about to do. The attic was just as I had left it, dark, dusty, and unsettlingly quiet. But now, there was no turning back. I began searching, pulling aside old boxes, moving forgotten furniture, and shining my light into every corner. As I moved an old trunk, I noticed something strange. The floorboards beneath it were loose. My heart skipped a beat. Carefully, I pried up the floorboards, revealing a small, hidden compartment beneath. Inside was a bundle of letters, tied with a frayed ribbon. They were old, yellowed with age, but still intact. My hands shook as I opened the first one. It was from Lily's father, written in shaky handwriting. Asterisk, I failed her. It took her from me, and now she's gone. But I know she's still here, somewhere, lost in the shadows. I can feel her presence, hear her whispers. I've tried to find her, but the house, it won't let me. I pray that someday, someone will find her and set her free. Asterisk. Tears welled up in my eyes as I read the words. This wasn't just about the haunting. It was about a father who had been consumed by grief, desperate to save his daughter from something he couldn't understand. And now, it was up to me to finish what he had started. Suddenly, the attic door slammed shut with a deafening bang, and the air grew cold again. The shadows in the room seemed to ripple and shift, and I could hear faint whispers, Lily's voice, calling out to me. I wasn't alone. With trembling hands, I clutched the doll to my chest and whispered into the darkness, "Lily, I'm here. I'll find you." The whispering grew louder, the shadows closer. And then, for the first time, I felt it, her presence, strong and undeniable. She was here, with me, just out of reach. And something else was with her, something dark and ancient, lurking just beyond the veil of reality. I knew then that this wasn't just a haunting. It was a battle for her soul and mine. The attic grew darker, the shadows pulsing and swirling around me as if alive. The air was cold, but it wasn't the kind of cold that seeped in from outside. It was something unnatural, something that gnawed at my bones. I could feel Lily's presence in the room, like a faint whisper in the back of my mind, but there was something else too. Something malevolent. My hands shook as I clutched Lily's doll tighter, unsure of what to do. The voices were growing louder now, overlapping, frantic. It felt like a whirlwind of sound pressing down on me, wrapping me in confusion and fear. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The house had me. Suddenly, the shadows in the corner began to shift, morphing into something tangible. I held my breath as the darkness took form, elongating into a tall, twisted figure. Its presence filled the room with an overwhelming sense of dread, and I knew that whatever it was the thing that had taken Lily. The figure stood still for a moment, looming over me. Its face, or what should have been a face, was nothing but a void, a swirling mass of darkness. And yet, I could feel its eyes on me, watching me with a hunger that sent shivers down my spine. It moved toward me slowly, like it had all the time in the world. Every instinct I had screamed at me to run, to escape, but I was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. The shadows around it seemed to stretch, reaching out toward me like tendrils, trying to pull me into the darkness. But then, something happened. The doll in my hands began to warm, glowing faintly, like it was responding to the figure's presence. It pulsed with a soft light, and I could feel something shift in the air. The malevolent presence recoiled slightly, as if the doll, Lily's doll, was somehow pushing it back. Gathering what little courage I had left, I held the doll out toward the figure. "You can't have her," I whispered, my voice trembling. "She doesn't belong to you." The figure stopped, the air around it growing heavier, thicker. For a moment, everything was still, and I could feel the weight of the house pressing down on me, suffocating. Then, the whispering began again, louder this time, and I realized it wasn't coming from Lily, it was coming from the shadows. They were angry. The darkness surged toward me, and I stumbled back, my flashlight flickering as the room seemed to close in around me. I could feel the shadows tugging at me, trying to drag me into their depths, but the doll's soft glow remained, a faint shield between me and whatever force was trying to consume me. I had to act. If the doll was connected to Lily, then maybe it was the key to finding her, to breaking whatever hold this entity had over the house. I closed my eyes and focused on Lily, on the sadness I had felt when I first saw her in the attic. "I'm here," I whispered, more to her than to the figure looming over me. "I won't let you stay trapped." The shadows hesitated, the air in the attic growing colder still. And then, through the whispers and the oppressive darkness, I heard it, Lily's voice. Faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably hers. "Help me." My heart pounded as I opened my eyes, searching the room for any sign of her. The figure had stopped its advance, but the shadows were still thick, pressing in on me from all sides. I could feel the house itself resisting, as though it didn't want me to find her, to free her from whatever nightmare she had been trapped in. Gathering every ounce of courage I had, I stepped forward, the doll's glow steady in my hands. "Where are you, Lily?" I called out, my voice stronger now. "I'm not leaving without you." The shadows shifted violently, swirling around me in a chaotic frenzy. The figure in front of me seemed to blur, its form breaking apart into pieces of darkness, but I pressed on. I could feel her, Lily, just beyond the veil, waiting, hoping. I moved toward the far wall of the attic, the place where I had first seen her standing. The closer I got, the heavier the air became, like something was trying to push me back. But I kept moving, determined. Then, as I reached the wall, my foot hit something solid, another loose floorboard. Kneeling down, I pried it up with trembling hands. Beneath it was a small, hidden compartment, much like the one I had found before. Inside, wrapped in faded cloth, was a small locket. I picked it up, feeling the weight of it in my hand. The locket was tarnished, the chain broken, but it felt important. There was something about it, something that connected it to Lily. I opened it carefully, revealing a tiny portrait inside, a girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with long dark hair and wide, sad eyes. Lily. I held the locket close to the doll, and suddenly, the room erupted in a deafening roar. The shadows lashed out, furious, as if I had uncovered something they had been trying to keep hidden. The figure in the attic surged toward me, its form unraveling into a torrent of darkness. But in that moment, something else happened. The doll in my hands flared with a bright, brilliant light, pushing back the shadows with a force that took my breath away. The malevolent figure let out a guttural sound, a howl of rage, as the light enveloped it, driving it back into the darkness. And then, silence. The attic was still. The shadows were gone. The figure had vanished. I stood there, breathing hard, clutching the doll and the locket in my hands. The air felt lighter now, as if a weight had been lifted from the house. But I knew it wasn't over. Lily was still here. Somewhere. The shadows had released their hold, but the house had yet to reveal all its secrets. The silence in the attic was unnerving. The oppressive darkness had retreated, but I could still feel its lingering presence, like a predator lurking just beyond the light. The doll in my hands had dimmed again, its warmth fading, and the locket I found rested heavily in my palm. It felt like a key, a connection to Lily's soul. But what now? I descended from the attic, every creak of the ladder sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness of the house. The sense of dread that had consumed the place seemed to have lifted, but I knew better than to trust the quiet. Something still felt off, like the house was holding its breath, waiting for something. Downstairs, I sat on the couch, turning the locket over in my hands. The portrait of Lily inside stared back at me, her sad eyes hauntingly familiar now. She had been trapped here for so long, held by whatever malevolent force had taken her. But the question still gnawed at me: what had it been? And why Lily? I needed answers, but I didn't know where to turn next. The historical records, the attic, the doll, it all pointed to something that had been lurking in the house for decades. Yet the figure I had seen, the shadowy presence, wasn't just haunting the place, it was attached to it, feeding off it somehow. And Lily had been caught in the middle. Suddenly, the air in the room grew colder again. I stood up, my senses alert, every hair on my body standing on end. I wasn't alone. I clutched the locket tightly and turned, scanning the room. That's when I saw it, a faint flicker of movement in the corner. At first, it was just a shadow, but slowly, a figure began to take shape. It was Lily. She stood there, still in her nightgown, her eyes wide and frightened. But this time, she wasn't looking at me. She was looking past me. I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest, and saw it again, the dark figure, the twisted shadow that had haunted me in the attic. It was standing at the far end of the room, motionless, watching. Its presence filled the air with a deep, palpable fear. The shadows around it seemed to pulse, like they were alive, writhing in the darkness. I backed up instinctively, my mind racing. The doll's light had pushed it back before, but this time it felt different. Stronger. Angrier. Lily's voice, soft and trembling, broke through the tension. "It won't let me leave." Her words hit me like a blow. I turned to her, seeing the fear etched on her face. She wasn't just a ghost, she was a prisoner, bound to this house by the very thing that had taken her. And now, it was coming for me. The figure moved closer, its form distorting, growing larger as the shadows stretched toward me. I could feel the cold seeping into my skin, freezing my breath in my throat. But then I looked down at the locket, the small portrait of Lily staring back at me. This is it, I thought. This is what it left behind. The father's words came back to me. It always leaves something behind. Lily's locket was more than just a trinket. It was her connection to the world, a piece of her that had been left here when she was taken. If I could break whatever bond this thing had to the locket, maybe I could free her. "Lily," I said, my voice trembling but determined, "we're going to end this." I opened the locket and held it up toward the dark figure. The air in the room shifted, the shadows recoiling slightly as the locket caught the faint light. I could feel the malevolent presence pushing back, resisting, but I held firm. The locket grew warm in my hand, just as the doll had in the attic, and the light around it began to pulse. The figure let out a guttural sound, a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the house. The shadows thickened, swirling violently around the room, but the locket's light held steady. I could feel the tension building, the house itself seeming to groan under the strain of the battle taking place within its walls. Suddenly, the doll in my other hand flared to life again, glowing with the same soft, pulsing light as the locket. The connection between the two was undeniable now, a bridge between Lily's spirit and whatever was keeping her trapped here. The figure shrieked, its form twisting and writhing in the air, as if the light was burning it. But it wasn't over yet. I could feel the darkness fighting back, stronger than before, desperate to hold onto its power. The air around me thickened, pressing down on me like an invisible weight, and for a moment, I thought I might lose control. The locket and the doll began to flicker, their light dimming as the shadows closed in. And then, through the chaos, I heard Lily's voice again, stronger this time, clearer. "You have to let go." The words echoed in my mind, cutting through the fear and confusion. Let go? Of what? I looked down at the locket, its light growing fainter. The connection to Lily was strong, but I realized now that holding onto it wasn't enough. This wasn't just about freeing her, it was about breaking the house's hold on her. It had been feeding off her presence, using her fear and pain to strengthen its grip. And now, I had to release her from that bond. With a deep breath, I did the only thing I could think of. I let go of the locket. As it fell from my hand, the light inside it flared one final time, brighter than ever before. The dark figure let out an ear-piercing scream as the light engulfed it, burning away the shadows like fog in the morning sun. The room was bathed in a brilliant glow, and for a moment, everything was still. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The darkness vanished, the figure dissolving into nothingness. The air cleared, the cold dissipating, and the oppressive weight lifted from the room. I stood there, trembling, staring at the spot where the locket had fallen. It was gone. And so was Lily. The house felt different now, lighter, almost peaceful. I knew then that the malevolent presence that had haunted it was gone, and Lily was finally free. The locket had been the key to breaking the bond, but it wasn't just about the object itself, it was about releasing the pain and fear that had kept her trapped. As I stood there in the quiet house, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was over. The house was no longer haunted. Lily was no longer lost. But as I turned to leave, a soft whisper echoed in the air, barely audible but unmistakable. The whisper hung in the air, soft but resolute, echoing around me as the house settled into a silence it hadn't known for years. Lily's voice. The weight of her gratitude lingered, but so did the strange stillness of the house. It wasn't the oppressive, dark silence I had grown used to. It was the kind of quiet that comes after a long storm, a fragile calm. I stood there, my breath finally steadying, unsure what to do next. The locket, the doll, the shadows, they were all gone. Yet, somehow, I didn't feel entirely alone. There was a presence, faint but gentle, like the last trace of a memory fading into the distance. Lily had been freed, and whatever darkness had held her here was no more. But the house? It felt alive in a way I hadn't noticed before. Not haunted or cursed, but watchful. Like it was waiting for something. I turned toward the door, eager to leave. My fingers brushed against the cold doorknob, ready to turn it, but a soft creak from behind made me freeze. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the room, heart pounding. Had the nightmare really ended? Or was there something I'd missed? The living room remained as it was, old, weathered, but undisturbed. Except for one small detail. On the mantel above the fireplace, something caught my eye, a faint shimmer in the dim light. It hadn't been there before. Cautiously, I walked toward the mantel, my hands trembling slightly as I reached for the object. My breath caught in my throat when I saw what it was, a small, delicate key. It was rusted, but its intricate design was unmistakable. It looked ancient, like something that had been hidden away for years. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand, its cold metal biting into my skin. There was no note, no explanation, just the key. But I knew it had to mean something. This house had been full of secrets, and somehow, I felt like this was the last one. But where did it lead? I walked through the house, searching for anything the key might open. The kitchen, the study, the old master bedroom, nothing seemed out of place. But as I passed through the hallway that led back toward the attic stairs, a small door at the far end caught my attention. It had been there the whole time, but I had never noticed it before. Small and unobtrusive, almost hidden in the shadow of the staircase. My hand tightened around the key. Could this be it? I approached the door, my pulse quickening. It was covered in layers of peeling paint, and the doorknob was old and rusted. Kneeling down, I inserted the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. The lock clicked open with a soft, almost hesitant sound, as if the house itself had been waiting for this moment. I hesitated before turning the knob, a chill creeping down my spine. Something told me that whatever lay beyond this door was the final piece of the puzzle. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Behind it was a narrow staircase, descending into darkness. The air here was musty, thick with dust and the smell of earth, like a forgotten cellar that hadn't been touched in decades. I hesitated, my flashlight barely piercing the gloom. But I had come too far to turn back now. Slowly, I descended the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the tight space. The further down I went, the colder the air became, until I could see my breath in front of me. There was a feeling of anticipation hanging in the air, like I was on the edge of discovering something long buried. At the bottom of the staircase, I found myself in a small, stone-walled room. The walls were damp, and the floor was covered in a thick layer of dust. In the center of the room stood an old wooden chest, weathered and worn, its hinges rusted with age. My heart raced. This had to be it, the final secret. I knelt beside the chest, my fingers brushing against the rough wood. Taking a deep breath, I lifted the lid. It creaked open slowly, the sound unnervingly loud in the quiet space. Inside, wrapped in tattered cloth, was an old book. I reached for it, carefully lifting it from the chest. The leather cover was cracked and faded, but the pages inside were surprisingly well preserved. The title on the front was barely legible, but I could make out the words, "The Watchers of Willow Street." My pulse quickened as I opened the book, its pages filled with cramped, spidery handwriting. It was a journal, written by someone who had lived in the house long before Lily's family, before anyone had spoken of the haunting. The entries were filled with stories of strange occurrences, whispers in the night, and shadows that moved on their own. But as I read further, one name kept appearing again and again: the Watchers. According to the journal, the Watchers were not spirits, but something older, something that had been tied to the land long before the house was built. They weren't malevolent, but they were powerful, drawn to the house and its occupants, feeding off their emotions, especially fear and sorrow. They were the reason the house felt alive, the reason Lily had been trapped, and why I had felt their presence the entire time. The final entry sent a chill through me. Asterisk: the Watchers will take what they need, but they can be appeased. Once they are satisfied, they will leave, but they will never be truly gone. They remain, always watching, waiting. The house is their vessel, their link to this world. Asterisk. I closed the book, my mind spinning. The shadows, the figure in the attic, Lily's disappearance, it all made sense now. The Watchers had been drawn to Lily's fear, her loneliness, and had kept her trapped here for years. But they weren't gone. They were still watching, still waiting for something new to hold onto. Suddenly, I felt it, that watchful presence, faint but undeniable. It wasn't threatening, but it was there, just as the journal had said. The house had been freed from its dark hold, but it would never truly be empty. The Watchers remained, always in the background, silently observing. I placed the book back in the chest and closed the lid. As I made my way back up the stairs, the key still clutched in my hand, I knew that whatever had haunted this house was no longer a threat. But it would never be completely gone. The Watchers had been satisfied for now. I left the house that night, locking the door behind me. The weight of the past had lifted, but the echoes of its presence would never truly fade. The Watchers, the shadows, and Lily's spirit, they were all part of the house, part of its story. And now, so was I. As I walked away from the house on Willow Street, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. But this time, I didn't feel afraid. The Watchers were always there, but they were no longer my burden to bear. The house had its secrets, and I had uncovered them. But some mysteries, I realized, were better left in the dark.